Welcome to the Infuse Compassion podcast, hosted by me, Amy Quisenberry.
And me, Mark Carpenter.
We are on a mission to make this world a kinder place for us all by bringing healthier human connection to communities, families, and organizations of all types and sizes.
Our goal is to create stronger relationships, more inspired teams, increased trust, and improved results.
So let's get started with more ways to infuse compassion into our world.
Hello and welcome, Compassionators. We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. Amy and I are really looking forward to this conversation. You know the drill if you follow us, that we have a guest and then we spend the next episode talking about that guest. Last week, we had the great opportunity to talk with Karen Eddington and her work with the Under Pressure Project, and particularly this idea of this leave me alone era that we're in. And I'll tell you, after we stopped recording, but before we let Karen go, we had some additional conversation afterwards. And Amy and I are committed to following through on some of those thoughts. But before I jump into my thoughts around this, I want to hand it off to my good friend, Amy, and let Amy talk about some of her top line impressions that came from our conversation with Karen.
Yeah, I just want to start with something that Karen did that you don't even know about, Mark. I don't think you know about it. Maybe you do. And I told you, and I forgot to tell, and I forgot that I told you. But about a week before the recording, I get this LinkedIn message from Karen. I'm so excited for our upcoming time together. I can't wait to be with you and Mark on your podcast. And since she was a guest of yours, she wasn't front and center for me yet. I recognized the name. I remember seeing it, but I was like, wait a second, hold on. But I was really taken aback by that in such the most beautiful way. And I spotlight this because what does she do? She is an expert in making connections. And she went this extra step to make a connection with me prior to the recording. Not 5 minutes before, not the day before, a week before. And I thought, wow, that's really special. So her intentionality of how she shows up, what she does. And then I went to her website and I got to learn some more about her. And she is just so dynamic and she genuinely wants to learn about you, from you, connect with you. And it's so beautiful and it's so refreshing. So first there's all of that. And then there's the discussion, right? And as I shared with you and Karen afterward, I had a major breakthrough on the episode when she talked about how our networks. She spoke specifically about being a part of a support network is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. If you find yourself self-isolating, if you find yourself having difficulty struggling to connect, being a part of a support network. And I, for the first time, saw it so clearly when I had my version of a breakdown when I left corporate for 3 months and when I created my Start with Compassion framework. One of the things that I've often identified was that my network was virtual. I had 70,000 employees across the globe of this incredible company that I worked with. And I would travel to different locations and I would be in meetings and talking with people. But was I really connecting with people? Did I really have a true support network? There were a couple of people at the company that I had a strong connection with. But did I get intentional about reaching out to them, about really talking to them what my struggles and my challenges were? Really not to the level that I needed to. And so what happened? I didn't take the time in San Diego to connect with my network. As she spoke about, get um, a support network. Sometimes it's inconvenient. Getting up out of your house, getting dressed, transporting yourself to another place, not knowing who's going to be there. What am I going to say to these people? It's inconvenient. It could be uncomfortable. There's so many variables that you have no control over except for getting yourself up and over there. And I had this awakening almost of, Amy, you didn't have a support network. That's one of the reasons why you struggled so much, is you didn't have a support network. And so here's the beauty of this. I feel like if I feel myself slipping into that again, that self isolation, I feel like now I can go, okay, Amy, you know who your support network is. What are you going to do? What are you going to do now? You've got to reach out.
Yeah.
They don't know you're struggling, Amy. They don't know. You have to pick up the phone. You have to say, I need help. So that's my jumping off point, Mark.
And I want to drill on that just a little bit more, because you go to work, you're with people. So how can you say you don't have a support network? And I'll kind of follow this with, how can I be going to work? I'm talking about people who do work in an office, work with other people, or even virtually, you talk to people all the time. Well, you've got this network, you're with people all the time. How can you possibly feel lonely if you're always around all these people? And so I want to get your perspective on that. I have a take, but I want to get your perspective on it. What's the difference between I'm around people and I
Mhm.
actually have a support network?
That's a great question, and there's a couple different areas that I want to go here. One is, you asked a really important question at the end. What's the difference about being around people and having a support network? So I want to table that, okay? Because I want to go to what I've seen, and also I do. There's a lot of data out there about the difference between men and women in the workplace. And one of the things that men do very successfully is their social game, their networking is very strong. Women will sit at their desk and they're very task focused. I've got to get this project done. I found that I was sitting at my desk way too much, working on the projects, moving them forward. And I actually made an intentional effort this week to get up out of my desk and go have conversations with executives and say, hey, I just wanted to give you an update on the project, not an email. They weren't expecting me. I just walked upstairs and poked around the corner, and one of the executives looked up and smiled, and I was like, that's a welcoming smile.
It's an
And I
invitation.
That's an invitation. Nobody else was in there. They weren't on a meeting. And I said, hey, I've got some updates. Do you have a few minutes? We spent like 20 minutes. We had the most amazing conversation, great connection. I got to update them. And now this person is not a part of my support network, but what did I do? I stopped isolating myself, and I actually made a connection with somebody, furthered the connection that we already have. And so I know that, Amy, you can't sit at your desk all day long. You've got to get up, you've got to get out, you've got to socialize. And so I know I need to do that more. One. Do you have anything to add before I go to your second
Yeah,
piece?
I love that tip. Get up, see people. I just was thinking of an experience that my oldest son had, who manages an office for an arborist company, or a tree care company. He's an arborist. And they have these regional meetings periodically that during COVID, when they couldn't meet together, they did them virtually. And he and I were talking about that. And he said, we get good information and they're doing things to try to connect us. But the biggest value of those meetings was the conversations I would have in the halls with people afterwards.
Mhm.
And that's what you miss unless you're really intentional about I'm going to get up out of my desk, or I'm going to pick up the phone or get on a Zoom call or whatever it happens to be, and I'm going to make this connection. Yes, to have a business purpose, but also just to connect with people.
Yeah.
And so it's being more intentional about that. And I would say that helps you get out of the mental isolation that Karen talked about, but it also is going to help other people who may be
Mm.
feeling isolated in those situations.
Yeah. And that seeing that difference and understanding it and really being aware and conscious of it. I want to go to your second question, because this is such a big one. There's actually a a mentorship program that I put together and I lead at the company that I work for. And one of the things that so once a program is over, I meet one on one with every mentee and every mentor that was a part of the company. And I ask them the same series of questions, and then I use their feedback to make improvements, right? Understand what's working well, what needs to be done better. And one of the things that one of the mentees said to me is, I feel like as a result of going through this program, I have somebody in my corner for life. And but they didn't just say that. They also went on to say our first few meetings were very uncomfortable. I didn't know what to talk about. I felt like I was inconveniencing this leader, an executive, lots of responsibilities, huge team that they manage. It was their time continuing with the program, continuing to show up, continuing to get uncomfortable, as Karen said, to it's inconvenient. We don't have time to meet, but we're making time to meet. So they invested in each other. The relationship developed, the trust grew. And then now this person has gone to somebody in my corner for life. Not all relationships at work are going to be like that. But this one, because of the dynamic, because of the program, the intention of the program, and because they both chose to get vulnerable with each other and do the work, create safe places. They both kept showing up for each other. So we can take that example of what they did and we can apply that anywhere and say, in our relationships, are we showing up? Are we getting vulnerable? Are we putting ourselves forward? And as Karen likes to say, when we make it safe to be human, this is a quote that she gave us, when we make it safe to be human, perfect isolates, human connects. Let's make it safe to be human. And when we have people in our lives, that it doesn't matter what we bring them, what pot of garbage we put on their front doorstep, and they're like, I still love you. I still love you. I may not understand everything, but I love you and I'm here. That's the difference versus we don't always feel that safety, Mark. We don't always feel like, for a variety of reasons, this is the right person, this is the right environment, this is the right time. But so I would say some of those factors are what's the difference between people around me and actually a support network. That's my off the cliff talk. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Well, Karen made a great comment after we'd stopped recording. This always happens. We have these great after the episode conversations with people. But she talked about how a lot of times at work, the paycheck is the network.
Mm.
That it's because you're achieving stuff, you have people around you.
Mm.
And I'll go back to the statement that you quoted from her about perfect isolates. You see people at work who maybe have made a mistake, and other people started ignoring them a little bit because maybe they don't want to call it out. Maybe it's uncomfortable for them to have that happen. There's a story I tell. It was an experience a friend of mine, Nick, had. And I tell this in the book, Lead Like a Person, Not Like a Position, where he was on stage introducing a CEO and made a really big gaffe. He actually called out the name of the previous company that he worked for, which was a competitor,
Mm.
instead of the company that he actually worked for. And he was humiliated. He felt terrible. Well, when he came off stage, everybody just kind of ignored him.
Mm.
And he thought, this is it. I'm done. As soon as the CEO comes off that stage, he's going to fire me. And he felt completely isolated because he'd made that mistake. Now, he hadn't been there long enough to really build this kind of network that we were talking about. But it was really cool because when the CEO came off the stage, he was leading like a person. He went right over to Nick and he gave him a hug.
Hmm.
And he said to him in his ear, don't worry about it. We all make mistakes.
Oh.
Everybody's done something like that here. Just don't worry about it. Now, think about the kind of connection that builds at work. Think about the comment that you made from that mentorship program. I know somebody's got my back.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of thing that I think will bring people out of that mental isolation that they feel, that they can say, I do know somebody here has got my back. I know it's going to be okay to make mistakes because I have connections that are human.
Mhm.
And those human connections are going to make it more safe at work and to get me out of that isolation mode.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I've struggled with is when I isolate myself, right? It's this self judgment that nobody is imposing on me. This is all just me. And I think one of the things that, I heard Karen talk about that is so powerful is everybody is doing this. Like so many people are going through this self-judgment, this isolating. And it's the thing is I know this. I speak about judgment. Silencing the judger is the first S in the Start with Compassion framework. But yet I've noticed that when I self isolate, it begins with this self talk of judgment. And I think that, you know, being able to stop that pattern, being able to stop that from happening is so absolutely critical. And that connectivity, that connection that we feel with other people, my heart. So I'm kind of going on like a track right here, but when we have a choice, I talked about your mom briefly, the story that you've shared about your mom. You know, all of a sudden, it's your story. I don't want to tell it. It's yours to share again if you choose to. But your mom, my version, your mom was in a situation where she's like, I've got some work to do. I got to figure this out. She didn't have a choice, right? There have been situations that people in my life, elders that I've seen, they didn't have a choice. They just figured it out. They had to figure it out. And I'm scared, Mark. I'm scared when I think of choosing safety over risk because we're we don't know what's on the other side of that decision, and so we don't make a decision. We don't know what's on the other side of this action, so we don't do an action. I'm scared of what that looks like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I don't tell me something, Mark. Get me off the cliff.
Well, and that's it, because fear often freezes us. It puts us in that situation where, especially if we feel like we're all alone in that decision. But anytime somebody's facing those fears, I think this community that Karen talked about is a key factor in getting beyond that fear. A lot of the isolating fear is I'm the only one who ever has experienced this, or I'm the only one who feels this way. When the reality is, there's a lot of people who have felt that same kind of isolation. There's a lot of people who had those same kind of fears. And so that community, I think, is the great first step forward in overcoming those fears, is recognizing you've got people who've got your back. You've got people that you can lean on. And I think that's why the community is so important in helping to get out of that isolation. Um, you made a comment about um, isolating ourselves. That I think sometimes we send a message to people that we want to be isolated, but inadvertently. You get people who are just maybe a little more quiet or who are a little more uncomfortable in large social situations. And you think, okay, they want to be alone. And so we leave those people alone. And then it just perpetuates that self isolation. And I loved how Karen talked about giving people gentle invitations to be part of a community, to step out of that comfort zone and to make a step that's going to help build community and break down the isolation that you may be feeling.
So, Mark, I have a question for you. Based on what you learned today from Karen, okay, I want you to go back to the college, right? The story that you started the last episode with. You're back in that room with those incredible college students, but eye contact isn't being made, questions aren't being answered. Is there anything that you're doing differently?
Is there anything I'm doing differently or anything I would have done differently in that group?
That's what I'm asking. Like, what, as a result of this conversation with Karen,
Yeah.
what would you do differently if you had that to do a second time?
And it's interesting because I do this a lot in other situations, and I didn't think to do it then. But I probably would have said, turn to the person next to you,
Mm-hmm.
and each of you answer this question.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a little safer to say, oh, this is just her and me. I'm not speaking this to the whole group. And they were, like I said in that experience I was sharing in the beginning of the last episode, they weren't right or wrong questions where somebody had a fear of, oh, if I say this, it'll be wrong. They were just opinion types of questions. But sometimes it's hard to be the one that says it to the whole group. It might have been a little easier to say, I can say it to this person who I'm sitting next to.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how that happens in college rooms. They'll come in and they'll sit next to the person that they feel more comfortable with. And so that could have been a little more comfortable to start there. And then I probably would have said, all right, whose partner had a good thought on this? Share the thought that your partner said. Then it's not their thought that's coming out, it's their partner's thought. And so it's a little easier for me to say, oh, Amy had this great idea. And so that is probably a step that I could have taken there to help overcome some of that uh, hesitancy that I got in participating in that room.
Yeah. There's a lot of workshops and trainings that I lead, and one of the things that I've heard from the participants over and over again is we love the breakout rooms. We don't like it when you give us a question as a group. We want you to give us a question. Let us go talk about it in a smaller group. They love, like the example you just shared, they love the one on one. They talk about it, they create a connection between the two of them, and then everybody comes back and they share a little bit about it. These people who, when I originally asked the question, are again looking down, don't call on me. They're like anything but, and then all of a sudden they come back and they're beaming because they made such a strong connection with this other person. So I love that you shared that. Yeah.
I'm going to give one more layer to that because this happens all the time with me when I'm teaching adults. Is I'll have them break up into the small groups, have the discussion, and come back, and they all groan going into the small discussion groups,
Mm-hmm.
or not all of them, but many of them do. They're like, "Ugh, you're going to force us to participate," is basically the feeling that I get. But then at the end, that does become the most valuable part of their learning process. But a
Yeah.
lot of times there's still that reluctance. There's that, no, just leave me alone and let me sit here and learn in isolation, or let me be a passive learner. But that's not the strongest way to learn. We
Yeah.
learn from each other and we learn by sharing with other people. And so it's interesting because I do get resistance on that too. That's another one of those areas where we kind of isolate ourselves and say, leave me alone. But
Mm-hmm.
there's actually value in that because it builds that community that we've been talking about.
Well, and this conversation is taking me back to another episode that we were on. I can't remember who our guest was, but we talked about one of the best things that we can do when we're struggling is actually to reach out to somebody else.
Yeah.
And when I think about this, when you're reaching out to give somebody else support, it doesn't matter how the connection happens, whoever reaches out to who, but it's this lifeline. And sometimes the lifeline that you think you're giving to somebody else is actually the lifeline that you're giving to yourself, just by reaching out and saying, hey, can we go for a walk today? Just wanted to say hi. That's exactly what we needed, is for us to pull ourselves out. Hmm.
Yeah.
What else? What
There was a
else?
comment that you called out for me, and so I want to go back to it. But it was something that Karen said, and I want you to talk about why you feel like that's so impactful. And the
Hmm.
comment was, make decisions that bring peace.
Yeah.
Make decisions that bring peace. So I want to get your perspective on what does that mean to you? Why do you feel like that was so important?
Yeah, we didn't talk about this on the last episode, but when I was researching her, I saw it's actually one of her go-to phrases. One of Karen's go-to phrases is make decisions that bring you peace. And the reason why I spotlighted that was because what I've learned in life is that I refer to it, when I lay my head down on my pillow and I'm reflecting on what I did and how I did it, the decisions I made, the conversations I had and how I had them, how I showed up that day, how peaceful and calm and quiet I am as I lay my head down on my pillow is a direct reflection on how I lived my day. And so she, I believe, is saying something exactly like what I'm saying, just in a different way. And I think that, I've talked about the self-isolation a lot today, but I also know that as an extrovert, you and I have talked about this. Even though we love being out there, we need our quiet time. We can't do the work that we do if we don't come back to home and give ourselves the quiet and the peace and the solitude to charge our batteries. And so much of my discovery is in the self isolation. I just need to be better at enough is enough, Amy. It's time to get out into the world again. But going back to your question, when I am making decisions and living my life in a way that softens my heart and lightens my smile, I sleep really well at night.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go to something you just said too about extroverts versus introverts,
Mm.
because every time I take any assessment about introversion and extroversion, I'm like right in the middle. I'm either like 49% on one side and 51 on the other, or vice versa. And so I have a lot of introversion tendencies with me, which people think is weird because of what I do.
Mhm.
What I do is very public, but I really value my isolation too. So I think about people who are more strongly on that introversion side, and they may feel like, I don't need community, I need my isolation.
Mhm.
But we all need community, because I know there's times when I've had complete isolation. I need to talk to somebody, even though it does sometimes feel uncomfortable. I need that. I need to be able to push out there. And so I just wanted to put that out for our listeners as well, that we all need community. Don't self isolate yourself under the guise of I'm just being an introvert, because that's just going to drive your loneliness farther and farther down. I think that Karen and the work that she's doing is so important. And so I just want to encourage everybody to go out and learn more about that Under Pressure project that she did the research on, and listen to the last episode if you didn't catch it, so you can get a little more of her perspective on that. But just to see why there's so much value in building these communities to get us out of that sense of isolation that seems to be growing and growing as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want you to add a little bit more on that, Mark. When you say we all need a community, how have you seen that change your life, having a community?
Well, I do a lot of individual work. I do a lot of my work on my own. I'm a one man shop in my business, so I don't have an office to go to where I have office mates. And so there are times when I just call somebody, maybe who's in the same situation as I am, or maybe it's somebody that I've worked with before, and say, let's go to lunch. And just having that conversation with them to say, here's some things that I'm struggling with, and ask them, what are you struggling with? And just to verbalize some of those things. It doesn't often always change things. There's no magic pill that it fixes everything, but it gets me out of that isolation mode of feeling like I'm the only one that has this problem, and I'm the only one who can fix it. I have to do everything myself. I think that builds that sense of isolation that we have. And so just being intentional about having some of those connections and finding those people who have your back and being the person that has somebody else's back, I think makes a huge difference too, because that's going to get you out of your isolation mode by helping other people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I have one last thing to add. I loved Karen's tip. It's a tip we've never heard before.
Yeah.
Laughter, music, and the arts. Yes, more.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And
Right?
it's someone who loves music. I've been involved in music all my life. In fact, I just experienced this a couple of days ago. I had a minute where I was like, I am going to take part of my lunch break here just to sit down and play the piano. And just 10 minutes to do that. It refreshed me. It reinvigorated me for the day. Yeah. Bring in those things that you love. Listen to music that makes you smile. Listen to music that makes you tap your foot. Look at something that is beautiful to you. I would put nature into that too. Walk outside, look at the blue sky. This is another challenge that I face where I spend most of my life sitting in my 10 by 10 office. And there are times when I'm just got to walk to the mailbox. I just got to get outside and walk down the sidewalk and back, or just stand out there and look up at the sky, because that's renewing. That's refreshing. So I loved that tip too. I was so glad she said that.
Well, and everything that you talked about, Mark, that's all connection.
Yep.
Like, how beautiful is that for your soul? What a beautiful gift that you're giving your soul and all of that connection. So, like, when I hear this, it's not even necessarily with another person, but it's getting out of our heads and into our hearts and into our body and connecting with all of this beauty around us. So, thank you again for bringing Karen. What a gift to the world she
She's
is.
totally delightful. I
Yeah.
just really love listening to her, and I love the great work that she's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. You want to close us out?
Yeah, I would just leave our listeners, our compassionators, with this thought. Look for ways to make connections this week, even if it's a little uncomfortable. Make a connection, because it'll benefit you and it'll benefit the other person. Thanks for being with us. Join us next week. We've got another great guest on tap.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share a review and like the podcast so other compassionators can join us. Until next time, let's all do something each day to infuse compassion into the world. For more information on our guests, see the show notes. For more information on Mark and Amy, go to infusecompassion.com.